So welcome back, everybody, to the PACtrospective. It's a very special PACtrospective because I'm here with two very special people. I'm here with co-founding artistic director Dan Hodge and Charlotte Northeast, artistic associate of the PAC, who's responsible for this mess that we called MARIA MARTEN, as she was the director. So, hi Charlotte, hi Dan.
Hey, hey.
Hi.
So welcome to the PACtrospective, welcome to the Why. We're going to talk about MARIA MARTEN, which was a melodrama that we did. This was in spring of 2018. So the first question that I'm going to ask you, because it's the title of this PACtrospective, Charlotte, so, and you know, for us, so why MARIA MARTEN?
Well, you can thank Dan Hodge for that one. Dan had this script lying around, and I think we wanted to find balance. We like to find balance in the seasons, and we had done a deep tragedy, and the other extreme that PAC likes to go to is really silly comedy, and we'd never done a melodrama. And I read this piece written by Anonymous. Thank you, Anonymous. And it just, like, you know when you read a piece as a director and it just like it just explodes in your brain? Well, that's what it did. I was like, this is so silly and ridiculous. I need to do this. So that's the why. We'd never done a melodrama. I didn't know how it would sit with a 21st century audience. And it just spoke to me that we need to do this. I know some people who are just foolish enough to do it with me. So, yeah.
So, yeah, like I remember, I can't remember what we were talking about with our theme for the season. It was like from the sublime to the silly or something like that. You know, because we did Iphigenia et Aulis, which is a Greek tragedy, which had very deep themes and very tragic. We'll be talking about that in a few weeks. And then, so that was in the fall. And then we did this melodrama. So I don't know, Dan, maybe you want to talk about like we've mentioned melodrama a couple of times, but what is a melodrama?
I mean, by definition, a melodrama is a play with music. You know what I mean? And it's different than a musical, in the sense that, like, there aren't really songs necessarily. I mean, most melodramas from the period do have songs incorporated in them, but what that typically means is that there's an accompanying musical score that goes along with the action of the play that informs the audience how they should be feeling and reacting to the action that they are seeing. And it's really interesting reading a script like this, because it will have things like, you know, the villain will start the speech and it will indicate like tremolo. And then, you know, as the stage directions will actually say that as the villain like kind of chases the speech up to its conclusion, that the score rises with him to a terrifying crash. And unless I'm mistaken, and at least one instance in this script, it says that the villain should have to be shouting to be heard over the sound of the music. Yeah. And you read that and you go, well, I mean, melodrama was popular entertainment on the stage for, I think close to 25 years. Like, it was the mode of dramatic popular entertainment. You know, if you weren't going to see like high art, you were probably going to see a play like this. Very clearly drawn characters. The villains are very bad with almost no redeeming qualities. The heroes are always so sympathetic and wonderful. They're very satisfying, and a lot of the entertainment that we consume today has roots directly back into this kind of thing.
So we say it's melodrama, and a lot of melodramas at the time, especially, were based on true stories. So this play is called MARIA MARTEN, or The Murder in the Red Barn. So, and it was based on a true story. Chuck, do you want to talk about like what was this story, the actual true story that this was based on?
Yeah, and it's a little sad, and you got to wonder how something so tragic and awful became such a ridiculous thing. And I didn't want to discount that, you know, but MARIA MARTEN was a real person, and she, unlike the play, she in the play she's sort of deified, and she's put on a pedestal as this paragon of virtue, and in the in real life, she apparently was not. She was her father was a mole killer. He thumped moles over the head. And so she came from very humble beginnings. And she got involved with a wealthy man called William Corder, who, by all accounts, was a dreadful human being, absolutely terrible person. And I believe she got into trouble with him, and he ended up murdering her and putting her body in a shallow grave in the Red Barn, which did exist up to a certain point and then was destroyed. But there are markers where you can sort of find where the Red Barn is in England. And it became this terrible thing, and they couldn't find her body for a while. And then this apparently is true. Her mother had a dream that Maria came to her and said, "This is where my body is." And they went to the barn and found her body. And William Corder was not a very smart murderer, and they caught him very quickly. And apparently he was into all sorts of chicanery. He was ripping people off, and he was into fraud, and he was into all these things. Anyway, they did arrest him, and it was the trial of the century. And when he was hung, hundreds of people showed up. And his skin was removed and turned into a book cover, and his skull was also taken and kept by a physician. Apparently it was haunted, but there is a museum in a small town in England where you can see both of these artifacts, the book covered in his skin and the skull. So there's just so much that comes out of this very tragic tale that kind of makes it right for melodrama, which, you know, also being a play with songs, is so soaked in the extremity of emotions. So you've got the big, big love, and you've got the big, big depths of evil and despair and sorrow and all these things. And so melodrama is just, I guess it really lent itself to this story. But yeah, Maria Marten was a very real person. There's a small marker for her, which one day I hope to visit when I get back to it. So, yeah.
When I was going through and you know, in the beginning of this, there's a bunch of pictures from the show. You know, it's ridiculous looking at it. And you know, I came across like some of the old reviews for the show as well that we did. And there was one here that says, "Mine's a legitimate performance," shouts one. "Mine's a variety entertainment," replies the other. "That's melodrama in a nutshell. And PAC's delightful show delivers just enough of both."
Wait, we delivered some legitimate performance?
That's right, the combination. And it's something because, you know, because we're talking about, you know, based on a true story. So, you know, this was a real murder that was made into this variety entertainment. But there is something to it that it's almost maybe part of the entertainment of it was that it had low humor, but it was also a morality tale, you know, a warning of like, you could don't do this. I had a little bit of that in there. You know, Charlotte, as a director, you know, this was your first time back directing for us since Fair Maid of the West. So, which was in 2015, which we'll talk about again in a few months. But, you know, Maria Marten was very dumb in all the good ways. It had a lot of really, really silly, funny, slapstick, kind of crazy humor. And you know, I would say that Fair Maid had a lot of the same. But I would say that for both, you know, out of material that you think you wouldn't be able to find it, you found heart in both of those. You know, is that something that, is that what drew you to those kinds of plays, to direct Maria, to direct Fair Maid?
Yes. I mean, you first of all, you know, classical plays, whether they earn this moniker or not, get labeled as, oh, they're not very friendly to women, which is, you can make an argument on that side. So when we do a classical play, there's a duty to look for the human woman in it. And I think, you know, PAC certainly has a history of looking for the human woman in the stories. And Fair Maid of the West and Maria Marten, that was what I was after. This is not a caricature. This is not a cutout. This is a human woman who finds herself in whatever situation. And I can't direct a play unless I can find the humanity in it. I just can't. then it's just a commercial or it's an exercise, and I can't find it. Also, this is too damn hard not to find the humanity in it. It has to. So once you find the humanity, actually, the humor kind of just falls right in line, because everything comes out of a kernel of truth, whether it's tragedy or comedy. It has to come from truth. So what is the truthful moment here? It's X. How can we make that a little sillier? We could just put this little spice of this on it. You know what I mean? So starting with the truth will always lead you into a rich, rich direction, whether it's comedy or tragedy. So that's where I try to start. And Bess and Fair Maid certainly had that. And Mariah, played by the incredible Victoria Alia Goings, just they were the human center in all of this. And so it was very easy to find the comedy radiating out of that.
It's something, because like in the review, I also talked about, we're going to talk to Victoria next week, and it talks about Victoria's performance as well. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something like, brings more depth than you would think this role would allow to Mariah, because she was fantastic, and she was the moral center, and she was the heart of the play.
And she was funny. She was funny. And
yeah.
she was a fighter, and she was passionate, and she was true to herself. And Victoria came into that audition, and I was just like blown away by her. And she was Mariah. It was no doubt in my mind. Yeah.
I guess it's the thing of like, what you're talking about, like, it's so easy to play into these roles as victims. And I guess the thing that you were trying to strive for in directing is that they are fighters, that they are equal to or actually better than the villains in these plays.
Yes.
Which is my segue into villains. So for those of you that saw the show, you know that my great friend there, Dan Hodge, and I would switch roles every single night. So one night, one of us would be the dastardly villain, William Corder, and the other one would be the country bumpkin. What was his name?
Tim Bobbin.
Tim Bobbin. Good old Tim Bobbin. So whose idea was this to we're gonna switch roles? That would be Dan Hodge.
We were over at your house having a PAC meeting of some kind, which when we have our PAC meetings at Damon and Charlotte's house, we always eat pizza and usually have a couple of beers. And we had decided that we were going to do this play. And Damon is a great, great fit for William Corder, the villain. And I have always wanted to play a role like that. Like, I grew up watching Vincent Price and all that kind of stuff. So I really had a strong desire to. And Charlotte got all coy and leaned back in her chair and said, I'm going to make you guys fight for it. Like, you did. You did. You said you're going to make us fight over who got to play it. And I was like, well, you know what we ought to do? We ought to just switch nights. And Charlotte got a very twisty little look on her face. He goes, what? I was like, they used to do it back in the day where like Othello and Iago would switch and like all this kind of stuff. And I says, what if Damon and I alternated nights as the villain and the clown? And Charlotte looked like fireworks went off in her brain. And about 3 or 4 days later, she came back to the group and said she wanted to do it. And Damon, as I recall, you were not very happy about the idea.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly why, but I thought it would be too hard. Like, I forget like the exact reason why like I didn't like it. But Charlotte, we did it. So
I thought we were gonna have to rehearse twice as long.
I think that could have been it. And even then, like, I know like you and I in rehearsal, I've never done a show like this where we would switch every night and it was always on. But and like those two are two big roles that are always on. So I remember you and I backstage, we had our script placed all over the place backstage for all through rehearsal and through probably the first week and a half before we felt like, all right, I don't need to refer to this anymore. I know where I'm going next.
Because we're like being backstage and hearing your cue and going, no, and then realizing that's not you tonight.
Right? Yeah. So it's like, and I remember like having the color-coded script, so it's like this one's Tim, this one's the villain, so I know which one's which and when I'm doing what. And just like all the, like Tim especially had a ton of props. and there was like one big bit that was the whole. It was the classic Marx Brothers. You know, and this comes out of my jacket, and this comes out of my jacket, and this comes out of the jacket, and this comes out of the jacket, and then finally it's an axe or whatever it was, or their shovel or something.
It's stupider and stupider.
Oh,
yeah.
it's so stupid, and it's amazing. Like, you know, because we really only had half the time to rehearse a role. You know what I mean? It's like we both kept finding things during the course of the run. Do you want to talk about like what to me is like one of my favorite moments in the show, the beer bit?
Oh God! So as Tim Bobbin at the end, you're showing up to the hanging of William Corder, and we had this bit that Damon instigated early in the play. He talks about going into a bar to get his gold changed into silver. And Damon came up with this idea that he goes into the bar and gets his gold changed into silver and pulls out a Coors Light, the silver bullet, which we thought was hilarious. And it also meant that we got to drink a beer on stage during a play, which is something that you never get to do. And I think we were in performance when one of the nights I was on as Tim Bobbin, I came out with this beer from the lobby in the final scene to go see William Corder get hanged. And I cracked the beer and drank the entire thing. While the audience just sat there and watched a grown man pound a beer in the final scene of the play. And it would sometimes get a laugh, but more often than not, it tended to make the audience really uncomfortable. And I didn't find the punchline to that joke. I'm so regretful of it. I found the punchline the final night that I played Tim Bobbin, which is I come out on stage with Sarah Nattel, and I say the line, whatever the thing is, and I pull out that beer and I crack it, and I drank the entire beer while the audience watched, and then immediately pulled out another one and cracked that. So give me that onion or whatever the joke was. The cracking of the second beer, the fact that you could pound one and it wasn't enough.
Right.
It was finally got a laugh, and I was so regretful that I didn't find that at the beginning of the run.
Would have gotten through twice the beer though, so
well,
you know.
Problems to have.
We did have a Coors budget. So rehearsing this thing, Charlotte, you know, with working with you know a full cast that had to deal with like me and Dan. Like, what was the technique you used in terms of rehearsal to make sure that everyone got like a decent amount of time?
Well, first of all, shout out to the cast, because the cast were all in single tracks. And they, you know, and I tried to prepare them as much as I could. Like, you're going to get something different every night, which I think is really, you know, once you get past the logistics of it, is a gift. You know, that you're always going to get something fresh. You know, whenever an understudy goes on, everybody's like, just, you know, there's that excitement in the room. So they were wonderful about it. But rehearsing it, it was like, it never felt like, you know, we'd go 3 steps and then we'd have to go, you know, it's like, it was a sort of symbiotic kind of feel. Like I would try to alternate, all right, you're going to be Bobbin now and you're going to be Corder, and then we'll run them through and we'll figure it out. So whoever went first obviously had the harder job, especially in the beginning, of like kind of trucking through the muck of finding this. And then the second person would walk and be like, and like, you know, and I was like, okay. But what you two, I think it took a few days, but I think you two started to find where you meshed and where your performances meshed, and then gave yourselves permission to make your own characters out of this. Like your Corders and your Bobbins were very different, even though the blocking was largely the same. The costumes were exactly the same. Thank God you both fit into them. So it was, I think the first week was a little difficult, and then we were just trying to find what this process was. And there was a generosity in the room of like, oh yeah, you can take that bit. Oh, I got an idea to enhance that bit. Yeah. And so it became its own philosophy after a while. So my job was just to kind of guide it through and to make sure, oh yeah, it's your turn to play Bobbin, and I like that. What do you think? You know, and so rather than rehearsing one person in one role, it became a very triangular conversation to create 4 different roles. So the math is really weird there, but I was really worried about it at first, but also the great help of Nicole Miller-Marks, who was my assistant director on the show, who just had a wonderful eye and kept continuity for me when I was like, what are we doing? Huh? That's actually what happens in my brain, that noise. So it was a lot of really smart brains in the room and two very willing and generous actors. And by that, I mean you two. I'm being nice. Look at that.
Yeah, like, you know, if you want to talk about how our villains were different, Dan, not talk about like how like our Tims were different.
I mean, it's kind of difficult to really put a finger on in some ways because doing a villain like William Corder as part of the stage tradition, like both William Corder and Tim Bobbin are essentially clown roles. Mm-hmm. Like you create these clown characters who navigate the world by a particular set of rules and have a particular outlook and a set of habits and a set of idiosyncrasies. So I think really what it boils down to is the idiosyncrasies that each of us brought to the part. I don't know. I mean, I will say this, like this show resulted in probably one of the most debilitating reviews that I've ever gotten in my entire life, which is the Inquirer, who came on opening night when I was playing the villain. And Damon, you were playing Tim Bobbin, the dope. The review literally said that Damon Bonetti is too handsome to be playing the clown. Dan Hodge should play it. Like, as the handsomer of the two, you were far more disposed to play the villain. And I was like, well, ow. That doesn't like being too ugly to play the villain's part. But no, it was really interesting. I think of the two of us, it's hard to say which of us had the more seriousness of intent as the villain. We each had moments of...
The more what of intent?
Seriousness of intent. Like the notion of like... each of us had specific moments where we dropped into the dark stuff and actually went dark. And then actually, like, I think for each of us after the murder of Maria, the kind of regret that settled in and the sense of humanity that even Corder had, that allowing a clown to have humanity is really something. And because you and I are different in the ways that we are, those I think were the moments that differentiated our characters the most. You know,
yeah, I was going to say the thing. The moments where the sinister, because there are moments of truly sinister things that happen in the play. I would say when, yeah, you both had different sort of timbres, if that makes any sense. I can't really articulate it any better than that. But when the sinister would come in, it was in different moments. And every time, but it was still equally like, ooh, yeah, he's a bad man. So yeah, it was really interesting to see you both track that. And I really let you run with it.
I think almost what it comes down to at the end of the day is a difference of the influences that you and I carried into the room, Damon. Like your William Corder, I think would have been in some ways far more at home in a film noir sort of setting, whereas mine is far more trashy horror film.
Yeah. Like you were definitely more Vincent Price Hammer horror.
Oh, richly, horribly.
Yeah, and I was definitely more Peter O'Toole ruling class.
Yeah, I think that's a great, very much. You know.
So then, like with our villains, and this is great, Charlotte. Like Dan and I try to figure out like what our thing was, and then Charlotte, if you go, okay, this is what it actually was. Like the villains, well, I think I'm sorry, the Tim is where I think we differed the most. You know, because Daniel Clark Hodge is from Texas, and I think you brought a lot of like you tapped into that Texas kind of inner bumpkin.
Oh yeah,
sort of have. And he was definitely kind of like, what's the best way to like kind of like put it, like absolutely sure of himself about every single thing. You know, with his absolute, I don't know, his absolute surety about like about this guy. And I think like with my guy, like I'm from South Philly. So I immediately just played into like, you know, going back to Damon from like high school and like being all mush mouth. And like I was just like, and I was like definitely like this South Philly Tim Bobbin, and definitely like channeling my inner Rocky, especially from Rocky 1. Especially so much that because it's good because there was that the almost fight scene that we had between Tim and Maria Marten, who's in disguise as a gentleman, and we see Mariah with our girl, and we're like, we're gonna fight. And so Andrew Clotworthy was our musician, and he composed a lot of the inter transition music and stuff, and then composed the songs and stuff. And so like I had a thing, which was, and we did this the entire time, where it was like, Andrew, hit it, where like we just like tell Andrew to play music for us. But this one time, like I think I was like, Andrew, hit it, and he would play the theme from Rocky. And then like I like rip whip off my jacket and throw it at somebody, and then like do push-ups and like, you know, all this kind of stuff. Like I almost wanted to have raw eggs and like down a thing of raw eggs. But like that's like, you know, mine. I was more like, I felt was more of an innocent, and yours was the cocksure bumpkin who's gonna do it no matter what.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
Yeah,
Dan,
go for it.
Oh, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, the thing that I kind of want to speak to on the through line of this guy is that like the clowns, comedy is one of the things that I think is really difficult when the jokes are written. Like they don't always age well. And the thing that's very interesting about the melodramas in reading about these plays, like Tim Bobbin was not really the character's name. Like Tim Bobbin was the name of a particular clown actor who did these kinds of roles in these kind of shows. Like, so it wasn't necessarily that you were like, the character was called Tim Bobbin. It was the Tim Bobbin part. Like you hired Tim Bobbin to do this. And as a result, you're literally trying to do another comedian's jokes, which is weirdly impossible, particularly if you don't know the way that comedian operated. So what it afforded was room for each of us to invest in what our clown was. And thank God for Charlotte's generosity, because the text was not gospel. Tim Bobbin was the place where we kind of got to go the most rote. Like all the other characters, like as William Corder, you said William Corder's lines and you played William Corder in a particular way because that is actually a role that gets played. Whereas Tim Bobbin, you kind of got to like, well, this is my version of this joke. And Damon and I are very, very different clowns. Mm-hmm. I think you're right in pointing out that it boils down to the heritage that each of us comes from and the particular version of what are the stupid guys from our upbringing.
Right.
So, yeah, that's it.
It was funny, like, yeah, on the confidence chart, you know, Tim Bobbin was just exuding confidence, you know, and we all love to see that in a comedian. Like I've been watching Holy Moly with my kid. It's a terrible show about golf, but Ron Riggles, that guy is just one giant pile of confidence, right? Like he's like not very bright, at least that's his persona. And so it's that confident, not bright guy that is funny. But the level of innocence that you both have very different levels of innocence. Do you know what I mean? And they were both effective in their way in that there were different moments where Tim Bobbin, you're like, oh, poor Tim Bobbin. Like you feel bad for him. You know, 'cause he you know, he didn't know she was going to say she loved him or he lost his favorite horse nail. Was it the horse nail? Yeah,
it was the horse nail.
Weird horse nail. And so it was just fun to see saying almost the exact same lines, but in these different shades of innocence and confidence and ridiculousness, and it was a real treat to watch, not only watch the two of you build these characters, but how they grew, and the fact that every night they were different because you were literally playing a different role. So yeah, I hope people saw it twice because that's the full experience.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how many people like actually saw it twice.
Some people did.
Yeah.
Some people definitely did. Some close friends for sure, and then I think some lay people as well.
That's really cool. You know, they were talking about like how Tim Bobbin especially was a character that was malleable in the sense that there were the lines, but there were like set piece bits. And, you know, it all leads up to, you know, what we used to call our heat moment.
The heat moment.
You know,
Yes.
Heat's the moment where the Heat's the film where Pacino and De Niro meet in the diner. And it's this scene where, like, you know, they're finally sharing the scene together. They're finally on camera together. Not comparing myself and Dan Hodge to Pacino or De Niro.
Oh, do it. The hell with those guys.
but our heat moment took place in the graveyard. And it was the scene between Tim and Quarter. And there was a money bit that I think, and I don't remember, there was a counting bit where, like, I think it was, and you owe me exactly, and then it became about counting. And I don't know if anyone, I think,
It was like 5 minutes, wasn't it?
I don't know. I mean, it went long. Liz Miesenthal was our stage manager, and I think she used to time these. But there was a time where, like, the counting went on for like a couple minutes. We're just nothing but waiting for Tim to figure out what he owes.
Well, it's a bastard bit, really, because Tim has to fill the time with counting, but the person who ended the bit was Quarter. Quarter had the next line.
Right.
So basically what it was if you were Tim, you just had to fill until the other guy decided it was time. And I will never forget that on my closing Tim Bobbin, Damon let me swing for a century. Like, I've got coins on the floor, and then it turned into a car chase, and like one of the coins hit something, and then an ambulance showed up. Like, I was doing this whole thing, and Damon finally just shut it up at a moment where I was like, I didn't know what I was going to have to start swallowing the coins or something.
Like, this is so inside baseball, but there was like another, like, more like a week and a half before or so, like, where we're doing the scene, and like I finally, like, I was meat playing Tim, and I got the money from you. I was like, haha. And so and then I gave the money back to you.
Yep.
And I just remember that you just, like,
yeah.
There's this moment of, like, all this to get the money, get it, great. And then hand it right back.
Yeah.
No.
I have to admit, as a director, and I did this with Fair Maid too, there are moments in every play I direct that are selfishly just for me. And I'm like, you know, if somebody else gets enjoyment out of this, that's just bonus. But, like, it's just, I probably should have nipped and tucked and trimmed that, but it was too good. And I just wanted to see what it meant.
And it's something, like, when you think about, like, you know, we're the people that run the theater company. And, you know, it's a thing you always think about, like, you know, your planning and stuff, and like where shows go. And you think, right before this, we did Iphigenia at Aulis, you know, with a wonderful cast on board the cruiser Olympia that we're gonna talk about in a few weeks. And then right after this, we did this really, like, lovely, weird, heartbreaking little piece called Mary Rose that we just went through the whole discussion about. You know, that this was sort of like perfectly set between the two. You know, that you can do, you know, the horror of Iphigenia, you can do the heartbreak of Mary Rose, and then find time to do something that's just really kind of fun and ridiculous that was the experience of Maria Marten. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about, particularly about this play, or a favorite moment?
I've got one small thing that occurred to me. When we talk about how the text for a piece like this is malleable, Damon actually set the tone for how the entire thing was going to go. The first line of the play goes to the character Tim Bobbin. And when we decided we were going to do it, we're all sitting around eating pizza, you know, and thinking that this is going to be a thing. The first line of the play, Tim Bobbin says in the text, is, dang me, I've never been so happy since the first day I was breached.
That's right.
Which is, they're at a barn dance. And we're eating pizza, and Damon leans back and goes, dang me, I've never been so drunk in all my life. Like, well, that's the new opening line. Like, that's, you know, you take the classics and you make them relevant for today.
Right, that is right. And the next line,
shut up, fool. Oh, shut the mouth, fool.
Was shut the mouth, fool. and then Sarah Chandler, shut up, fool.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, no offense to the writer's process, but we don't know who wrote this play. And I've often, my theory, and you know this theory, is that it was actually written it was a group effort, because it does feel a little patchwork throughout the play. And I like to think of it, this is my romantic notion, that it was created by a group of people who just loved creating things, and they were in a room and they made up something really fun and wonderful and ridiculous and malleable, flexible. And so that was what I through rose-colored glasses, decided to look at this play through, and our process. So it was like, yeah, let's change that line. Dang me, I've never been drunk in my life. And so that in honoring what I think was the birth of this play, we're doing it by just making our own version of it, and enhancing it for where we were in the space and the time. And I think all the artists that were in the room brought that philosophy to it, and it made it just a really wonderful, ridiculous experience. And it took it out of this melodrama. What did 21st century people know about melodrama? And it made it really fresh and new, while still honoring the precepts of melodrama as we think we know them. So yeah, that freshness and that organic ridiculousness was a-okay by me.
So to finish up, Dan, you were our very first PACtrospective way back in April or early May or whenever that was. So just checking in with you. So you're still down there in New Mexico.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Like, what are you up to?
Oh wow, I'm doing really pretty well. I don't know. I'm writing essentially is how I'm spending the bulk of my time these days. I have been picked up about a year ago now by a ghostwriting firm, and I've been writing romance novels for the last year under a variety of different names and a variety of different genres. And so yeah, that's my work there has actually really stepped up since I've been out here. And I just got picked up by another ghostwriting firm. So that's that's how I've been spending my time, apart from getting chased around by bears and wolves and trying to keep my one-eyed cat from jumping off the back deck. So that's pretty much it.
And Charlotte, how about you? I mean, for those of you that don't know, I'm lucky enough to be married to Miss Charlotte Northeast. So I do see Charlotte fairly often. But like, what do you? This is the first time that we've had you here on the PACtrospective. So what have you been doing?
Gosh, well, I technically am totally unemployed right now, like most of everyone in the arts. So, but I did like lots of COVID projects, as you know. We went through lots of closets and we went through lots of stuff. And that's been really great. It's been spending time with Jules, our son, and playing every game ever invented. Scrabble, Uno, poker, whatever. And I've been doing lots of really cool, like little gigs here and there, coaching dialects, coaching auditions, doing some readings here and there. So I'm just trying to figure out what's next. It's a really uncertain time. I'm lucky to be home with my son and you, Damon, and my dog and my cat, and my art, which I've continued to expand my collection. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. I don't know what's next. It's exciting and scary all at the same time.
Well, one thing you've been doing specifically for PAC is that you've been kind of the person leading the PACdemic, which is our reading club. So we did one about a month ago, The Gods Are Not to Blame, and we just did one last week, which was Alice Travis's Trouble in Mind. So do you want to talk briefly about what the PACdemic is and maybe how people can get involved with that?
Yeah, so the PACdemic came about as, this is strange, interesting moment we find ourselves in of like, what do we do now that we can't be in a theater? And we came up with this idea that we didn't quite want to do just readings with the Zoom box of actors, as cool as that is, that just wasn't the path for us. But we wanted to find a way to engage with our audience. You know, everybody's at home. Everybody's finding time to read or explore new things. And so we thought, wouldn't it be great to take plays that we've never encountered before or you know, haven't been encountered for a while and read them privately, and then like a book club, come together and discuss it. And it's been a really wonderful experience to look at a play in that medium. When you read a play, it's a solitary act, and then actors come together, and that's a very public act, and then they bring it to a public space and perform it for an audience, an even more public act. And so we're somewhere in between all of that, where we read it and then we discuss it. And so, yeah, it's been a really cool opportunity and a really great way to engage with our audience. We have a suggestion form. If you go to our website and look under, I believe it's season, a little drop down will come down and it'll say PACdemic Reading Club. Click on that and there's a Google form that will come up and you can suggest something that we should explore. We've had some really great suggestions. And then once a month we convene. I try to give a couple of weeks notice so people can read the play. I do try to provide the play because some of the scripts are difficult to find. And it's totally free. You go on Zoom. I'll send you a registration information. Yeah, so join us. It's been a really wonderful time. We've only done 2 of them, so you know, but we hope to do more once a month. So stay tuned.
Well, Charlotte and Dan, this has been a wonderful time. It's good hanging out with the 2 of you again to talk about this silly little melodrama we did called Maria Marten. So thanks again, Dan. Thanks again, Charlotte.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Damon.